Hey, thanks for joining me today for our weekly devotional. I'm Justin Allison. I'm the discipleship pastor here at Greenwood Baptist Church. And today we're going to start looking at the book of Psalms. We're going to be talking about the book of Psalms for a while. And the book of Psalms is it's one of my favorite books. I have a lot of favorite books in the Old Testament, but it's one of my favorites because it has a lot of interesting literary things that go on in the book. It's obviously a poetic sort of a book, and many of these would be categorized as songs, but there's several other types of psalms that we'll talk about in the coming weeks. We're going to start today in Psalm 1, the intro to really the entire book. And the way that the book of Psalms is structured is that it's composed, and it's arranged, really is the best word, into 5 separate books within one book, the book of Psalms. And we might debate who wrote the book of Psalms, but you'll see in a lot of the different Psalms, you actually get something like a Psalm of David, or the Song of Moses, or a Psalm of Korah, sons of Korah. There's a lot of different groups of these things. A Psalm of Ascent. There's several different titles that you'll see in here, and that gives us a clue about who wrote the book. Who wrote the actual psalm, and maybe the significance of it, or the use of that psalm, how it was intended. And then on another level, the book was arranged into the format that we have today. And that's important because then I think when you look at each book, you can kind of see some themes that move through each book of the psalm. And even notice that there's an introductory psalm and an ending psalm in each of those books. And really, Psalm chapter 1 that we're looking at today serves as an introduction to the entire work of the book of Psalms. And it starts off, it's a psalm that doesn't tell us who wrote it, but that's okay because it's showing us the difference between those who are wise, who follow the Lord. That's an important thing in the book of Psalms. Wisdom equates with following the instructions of the Lord, the Torah, the instructions of the Lord. So it's contrasting those who are wise in the Lord with those who are wicked. Okay? And so that's how the beginning of Psalms starts. And so when we read it, thinking of this as an introduction, we start to see that there's a contrast to the ways that that Psalms from God's people would expect God's people to act, and then there's a difference between that and the way that we expect others to act. So the opponents of God are the wicked. So this is an important thing to keep in mind, and we'll talk more about that later. But today, Psalm chapter 1, we're going to read the first few verses in Psalms 1 through 3. So Psalm chapter 1, verse 1 through 3 in the New Living Translation says this: "Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join with mockers. But they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. They are like trees planted along the river bank, bearing fruit in each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do." So this is how the people of the Lord are described. They delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. And we usually think of that as a verse that tells us something about what we're supposed to do as believers, so that we would be meditating, thinking about the word of the Lord, the instruction of the Lord, all throughout the day. Those who think about those things, dwell on it, meditate on it, are like trees planted on a riverbank. Locally, here by us in Weatherford, Hollow Lake Park has some giant cottonwood trees. That's the sort of tree that we're talking about here. Trees that have been around hundreds of years. They're immensely huge. The trunk is bigger than people, and so you're imagining looking at that. That's how God describes people who are delighting in the law of the Lord. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do. So there's a rootedness that happens when we put down roots in the word of the Lord. When we value his instructions, there's a wisdom that comes from that, so that these people, you and I, hopefully, will prosper in the things that we do. It's not to say that you're going to have to be rich and famous or anything like that, but that when we set out to follow the Lord in something, that when we are meditating on his word, when we're listening to his advice, when we're being guided by that, we will be successful in those things that we do. Now, there's a contrast here. That's the wicked people. They follow the advice of the wicked. They're standing around with sinners. They're joining in with mockers. These are people who are not following the instruction of the Lord. Verse 4 in chapter 1. But not the wicked. They are like worthless chaff scattered by the wind. They will be condemned at the time of judgment. Sinners have no place among the godly. For the Lord watches over the path of the godly, but the path of the wicked leads to destruction. And so one of the things that we can see here is in verse 5, it says, they will be condemned at the time of judgment. It's talking about those who don't follow the Lord. And then it has another line that follows right after that. Sinners will have no place among the godly. And this is kind of the first teacher sort of point I want to make in Psalm chapter 1. And that's that Psalms, there are artistry that they use. Is not poetic in the same way that a lot of times we think of with English type of poetry. Hebrew poetry, the artistic way that they liked to express themselves was in what's called parallelism. So there'd be one line and then another line or two that follows that gives a different nuance to the same thing. So it's sort of rephrasing something in a different way. So the wicked will be condemned. I'm inferring that they is the wicked from verse 4. They will be condemned at the time of judgment. So the wicked are going to be condemned. And then sinners have no place among the godly. So we're learning something else. Not only are they wicked, they're willfully sinning against the Lord. Not only will they be condemned at the time of judgment, but they have no place among the godly. So there's something for us to learn there, that they stick out, that they don't fit in with the godly people there. And then the conclusion of this introductory psalm says that the Lord watches over the path of the godly. And then we have another instance of that parallelism. The next line actually contrasts that same way. So the Lord watches over the path of the godly, but the path of the wicked, the Lord's not watching over that. This path of the wicked leads to destruction. And so there's an artistic way that Psalm 1:6 is pointing out the difference between the path of the wicked and the path of the godly. One is guarded by the Lord. One leads to destruction. And so the choice that's set before us as we look at Psalm chapter 1, this is where we would apply it to our lives here, is which path will you choose? So right now, today, when you're listening to this video, this audio, or watching this video, which path are you going to choose? Are you going to choose the path of the godly that the Lord watches over, the one that prospers, that's firmly planted? Or are you going to choose the path of the wicked, one that leads to destruction, the one that's worthless and scattered by the wind and has no place among the godly? Because really, that's the choice that we face day in and day out. When we get up and we start making our decisions, maybe the first decision is what you're going to eat. And believe it or not, you can glorify the Lord in what you choose to eat there at the very beginning. It might be in the way that you respond to one of your family members in the morning, but you start making those choices about which path you're going to follow. And usually, within a few hours, we would either say, I'm in a good mood today, or I'm in a bad mood today. And I hope that you'll rethink that and start to think about, am I following the path of the godly today, or am I following the path of the wicked that leads to destruction today? And I hope that you'll start to make those decisions and frame your choices in terms of which path am I following? Because the psalmist makes it clear that that everything that we have a choice in, it's like a fork in the road. There's a pathway, a destination at the end of that pathway. And based on the way that we choose, they lead to different places. And so I hope that's helpful for you today. And I hope that you will choose in all of your decisions that you make today, that you'll make a mental note right now to start looking for and choosing the path of the godly. How do we know that? Well, it comes from spending time in God's Word and reading what the Bible tells us is right and wrong. And as Psalm chapter 1, verse 2 says, by delighting in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night, we'll be rooted like trees planted along the riverbank. And so I hope that you'll make that decision today. I hope that that's helpful. I look forward to seeing you next time. We're going to talk about Psalm 2 and a little bit more in the first book of the entire book of Psalms. Hope that's helpful, and hope to see you on Sunday, if not before, and connect with you at the information desk, or you can drop me an email, jallison@greenwoodbc.com.